Everybody, welcome back to Only Stupid Answers. We're here to talk about Stargirl, Season 1, Episode 13, Stars and Stripe, Part 2. And with me today, I have a very special guest, Caroline Siede. Caroline, say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me, DJ.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. You've been reviewing Stargirl for the AV Club, and you've been writing for them for a while, and discussing a lot of property. We talk a lot of superhero properties on the show, and you've covered a lot of that stuff for them. Tell the kids at home a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I, like you said, writer for the AV Club, been covering Stargirl this year. I sort of have carved out two niches. One is writing about romantic comedies, and the other is writing about superhero TV shows. So I really cover the gamut of whatever you could want. But yeah, I wrote about the whole Marvel Netflix universe when those shows were still alive.
Yeah,
And recently, I've been writing about Umbrella Academy too. So those are my
very
two
cool.
my two shows I've been on right now.
Well, now that you said that, the Marvel Netflix shows, we obviously did some coverage for those as well when they were coming out. Now that it's well and dead, it's it's put to bed.
Yeah.
Let's phrase it that way. It's been
R.I.P.
put to bed. What is I gotta ask you, what is your thought of the Marvel Netflix as a whole, as how that went down as a whole, and maybe what was your favorite show?
Yeah, I think the whole thing was deeply flawed but impressively ambitious, and I do feel I honestly, whenever I end up writing about a show, I almost always end up feeling fondly for it,
Hmm.
even when I can find its flaws. I think my favorite of the shows is Daredevil, because I love anything that's just like moody Catholicism, which is
Hmm.
right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah,
Honestly, I really kind of enjoyed them all. I also loved The Punisher way more than I ever expected to. So yeah,
same.
I am mourning that universe. I think maybe even more than I would have expected to at the beginning.
I totally concur with that. And thinking back on it, as a kid, when I was growing up, and you first discover these superhero properties, and you find out like, wait, there was an old Hulk show, and you go check
Yeah.
out the Hulk show, and you're like, wow, this show's okay, but like it's cool that as an idea, it's cool that it exists. When you watch individual episodes, you're like, oh,
Mhm.
this is cool to see. Or like when I was younger, that's when the John Wesley Ship Flash show came out, and just the
Mhm.
idea of it was super cool. I feel like that for the generations coming, that's what those Netflix shows will be. They're like, well, what? There was a
Yeah.
Daredevil show on Netflix, and you visit it, and like you said, it's flawed, but like it's cool that it's there, like that it exists.
Yeah. And any of the little crossovers in that universe, I just find very charming. Any of
Yes.
the little, characters that jump around. So yeah, I hope people continue to discover that, even though it's not ongoing anymore.
And I also do hope a few of those actors make the jump
Oh, I
to
would love that.
specifically John Bernthal as Punisher. I
Yeah.
really have a hard time thinking of anybody
He's
fitting that role
so
better.
good.
Just
He
like
is so good.
Judy Dench as M. It's like, yeah, we're rebooting, but she's too good. We got to keep her as M. Like, we're just gonna roll with that. But
Yeah.
let's dive into this show. Very different than
Yeah.
the Marvel Netflix shows.
True.
Uh, I was going to say a lot less blood and violence, but that's not always true.
Yeah.
It actually can get kind of violent. This is, like I said at the top, this is Season 1, Episode 13, Stars and Stripe, Part 2. The synopsis is, as the Injustice Society of America come one step closer to accomplishing their mission, Courtney and the JSA face off against Icicle and the villains of the ISA in the season finale. And this episode was directed by Greg Beeman and written by Jeff Johns. So, as it states at the very top, we ended last episode with the adults were under mind control. And the kids are like, what are we going to do? And fortunately, Beth, with her best buddy, who's a computer, Chuck, are able to figure out. It's comic booky stuff. It's just comic booky. It's like, oh, they had us thing, and then they blocked the thing, and we'll
Yeah.
unblock the thing. And they're able to resolve that, and they get into a big battle. We've been waiting for it all season. It was in the teaser before the season. We finally got there. ISA versus JSA. Caroline, what did you think of and we also got a little bit of Stargirl versus Stripe. What did you think about the kids versus the adults, and then the big battle between the ISA and the JSA?
Yeah, I appreciate that this intro, at the opening of the episode, gave Beth something meaningful to do, because I think in a
Hmm.
way she has like the hardest power set to use in a
Yes.
conventional comic book show. So I appreciated that she got something to do, and that it wasn't just her asking Chuck and him doing it for her. Like, she was the one that sort of thought of, turning on the dampeners or whatever they were,
Yeah. There's
to sort
always
of
dampeners.
free, yeah, always dampeners to free Justin and Pat. On the other hand, I also was a little bit disappointed that after that cool cliffhanger at the last episode, we sort of immediately resolve it. And I
Hmm.
know that Barbara is still mind controlled, but I was like, oh, I was looking forward to seeing what the kids did without Pat and Justin to help them,
Yeah.
and I was a little disappointed to see that resolved so quickly.
It's also interesting. They do get through that fairly quickly. We also get Courtney admitting that she sees Pat as her father figure, which I
Yeah.
mean she should. Pat's the best. He's amazing. And we get into the fight with the ISA and the JSA. And I think you've mentioned in your reviews, and we've talked about in our reviews, that the action on the show has been consistently very entertaining, and does a good job of balancing camp with making the bad guys legitimately threatening. But there is always a sense, like when I'm seeing these kids fight this hardened group of evil people, and it's like, how is it? But then I had to remind myself, because like you think back to the first episode, and the ISA just wipes the floor with the original JSA. But then you got to remember, Dr. Midnight was like 100 years old. Like those were old dudes. So maybe the ISA is not as bad as we think they are. Maybe they're not as threatening as we think they are.
Well, that kind of is my overall question about this episode, which I think really is, they really just devote the majority of the time to that battle, which is very fun to watch. And like you said, very well choreographed and staged. But this season has done such a great job making the Injustice Society seem like a genuine threat.
Mm-hmm.
And then this episode sort of just needs to have them all defeated by the end.
Yeah.
And then my immediate thought, I was like, oh, was, like you said, is the original JSA, were they just not very good? Because it does seem like this group of teens that really haven't trained together for that long did fairly easily manage to defeat the ISA in one battle.
Well, I think you're forgetting the very core bit of training that they did, where they threw things at cardboard cutouts, and apparently that did the trick. Yeah, because it's
fought them all. That was all they needed.
It's nothing against these characters, but they are children. They are kids, right. And these people have been being evil for decades, centuries.
Yeah.
The age range of our villains is a little nebulous. Again, considering Dr. Midnight, when she puts on the goggles, he said he was born in like 1900, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah. Dude was holding up well for how long he was
doing
a superhero.
A-okay. And in the middle of this big battle, Cindy Shiv finally gets released, and then immediately kills her dad, which emphasizes something I pointed out throughout the show, that the ISA is their own worst enemy. I think the biggest body count on the ISA side has been them killing each other.
Yes, totally agree. And in a way, I think I'm kind of like, to be honest, just like struggling with this episode. I have things I like about it, things frustrate me about it. And I think like it's really satisfying when villains get defeated in a way that is like thematically relevant, which I think that like, everyone underestimating Cindy and then her being the one to come through is like a cool idea. But I think maybe too much of the defeats in this episode were not as like thematically relevant as they could have been. Like it kind of feels like Tigress and Sportsmaster, they're like, oh yeah, they just knocked him out. Like, don't worry about it. That's fine. So yeah, I think that the Cindy killing Dr. Ito, or presumably killing, I was like, I think he's immortal, so maybe he'll be back for season 2.
Yeah, he is
but
a lizard person.
At least taking him out for now. That was a moment that I thought was really effectively surprising and like a good use of the character dynamics that they had set up so far.
We set up Cindy and Henry King Jr., Brainwave Jr. as like traditional, like the bully and the jerk. And the more distance we got from that, the more I liked those characters. Like scenes with like Cindy just begging to be let out to murder somebody and stuff like that really endeared me to her as a character, not as like a person, but as a character on the show. And so I'm kind of glad she got that moment, and it's interesting. We'll dive into more of her because there's a setup for her in season 2. But yeah, so they beat the ISA. Gambler lets Grundy out, so we finally get a full Grundy bout, which goes from S.T.R.I.P.E to Our Man. Moment
of S.T.R.I.P.E getting his, sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
I'm just too excited to talk now. The moment of him getting his legs ripped off, I like genuinely found that very unsettling. And it took me a second to remember that Pat is, of course, hiding away in his stomach. Those are not Pat's legs, but it is like a very unnerving thing to watch. Again, I think they did a good job. They did a good job making Solomon Grundy feel like a genuine threat, which then also leads me to the question of, is he then too easily defeated at the end of that battle.
Yeah, because Iron Man punches him a few times. And again, nothing against Iron Man, but he's a kid. And I also don't know how strong that stuff makes him. Anytime you get a robot protagonist ripped apart, it's always, as a kid that grew up watching Transformers, they got a lot of mileage of those robots getting blown apart. Big fan of Doom Patrol, and they get some mileage out of Cliff Robot Man being ripped up a few times. So I'm totally with you with Stripe getting his legs ripped off. I am glad that we were able to get, like, there was a second there when it was GSA versus ISA, and Grundy wasn't there. I'm like, like, I want to see the big robot fight the big monster. And so I'm glad we got there. Talking about your thematic relevance, there is a little bit there because they've really hammered home that, like, our man blames Solomon Grundy for killing his parents. But I'm with you in that I don't want to say it felt hollow. That feels a little bit too harsh. But it does connect to kind of something else that even though I overall actually really enjoyed this episode, there are a few things that didn't click for me. And one of the things was Brainwave, who has also been set up as kind of one of our main antagonists. I guess as important as he was to the whole master plan, he could just unplug for a second to go do things.
Yeah, I really laughed at that too. He was like, "Just loop my signal
just
for
loop
5
it," and I was
minutes, and like I'll be back."
Wait, could we have done that too? Wait, what? Yeah. So he walks in there, and I actually thought the trickery with using an illusion of his son with Yolanda was really effective, even though it's kind of obvious. It's like, well, it's a trick. And then she kills him, which is a really effective, because I thought the line earlier was a little ham-fisted with, like, killing's bad. But she is a kid, and even though this guy's awful, there's some gravitas there. But then you have our man fighting like a literal monster, and he's like, I'm not going to do it. And you're like, but I don't even know if there's anything going on inside Grundy. And then kind of jumping ahead, we treat Mike pancaking Icicle as like a laugh line, and he's even younger than Yolanda is. I'm like, what's going on? Like, what are we trying to get at with this episode?
I agree that the Mike moment it's like, in the one sense, satisfying. Like, we kind of knew that Mike had to come and save the day in some sense, but also weirdly comedic for the emotional gravitas of this episode, which I do think actually reaches its peak with the subversion of Yolanda, who has been anti-murder, ends up committing murder, and then Rick, who has been, just wanting to kill Solomon this whole time, saves him. So I thought that was a cool subversion. I think, again, so maybe my issue really is just like, are these kids too overpowered for how little we've seen them train, and for how effectively terrifying the ISA have been? Like, I think that, like, this episode in isolation, I think I really love it, but this episode as a capper to the season, I don't know if it fully works.
I get that. I get that criticism, especially when you start phrasing stuff like that. It makes me think of how effective I thought the Arrow season 1 finale was, where Oliver kind of wins, but he doesn't. Like, half the city's blown up, and it's like, and how it might have been interesting if these kids were like, oh yeah, we didn't train once this season, and got beaten.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. Like, I think it's easy with a show like this that has in some ways subverted expectations to have really high expectations going in. And this is one I'm in some ways still processing, but I will commend this episode too. Like, we've gotten so many teases for Solomon Grundy all season, and I could see a lesser show just like kind of not really using him here. But this show goes it all out. Like, they are giving us a full Solomon Grundy fight, which looks very cool. I think his design is cool. Like we said, very effectively unnerving. So kudos to them for not, limiting the budget there after having teased us all season. I thought that was really cool.
I also think it's smart in that same vein how they've utilized or not utilized the stuff like Grundy and the Stripe armor, where it's like, you're not going to give it every episode, because when we do it, we want it to look cool. Like, we want it to not be lame. And we've talked about on these reviews as well, how good the show looks for what is essentially a CW superhero show, and that maintains there. So you had mixed feelings. Weirdly, we're kind of at there's some teases for what comes next, but that's kind of where this wraps up. The Icicle gets run over by a 10-year-old or however old he's supposed to be, and everybody high fives each other, and we get some teases. But what you had some mixed feelings, but what were some of the things you liked, and then what were some of the other things that maybe held this back for you or
Totally.
conflicted you?
I think that the fight itself, like we said, is just really well staged. There's a really cool moment that really shows off like Courtney's gymnastic skills.
Yeah.
She does like a cartwheel and then like a backflip. And
Yes.
I'm like, oh, this looks so cool. Like this is such a cool use of her powers. So that stuff I thought was excellent. The sort of Henry Jr. fake out. I actually was not 100% sure that was a trick. I was worried that was the show sort of like going back on his death, which I think is probably the most affecting moment of the season
Yeah.
for me is Henry's death. And I really liked, like, that wasn't a cool moment of Yolanda figuring it out because she actually knew Henry well, knew him better than his father did. Like his
Yeah.
father couldn't effectively imitate him. So I thought that was really cool. And then I think, but by the end of the battle, when it's sort of just like Courtney's like, oh, I'll just fly up there and just take down this big satellite without really worrying about it. And that's sort of the end of the day. I was like, oh yeah, it felt a little bit too easy, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that the ease is really what I'm struggling with the most with the episode. I did like the Jordan Barbara scene where he sort of makes one last ditch effort to be like, come rule with me as I take over the world. And she's like, no, dude, that's really not gonna be for me. So yeah, that was like a cool moment for Jordan, who I think Icicle's probably been my favorite villain of the season. And then again, that slightly strange comedy beat of, well, Mike just ran him over. So that's the end of that.
And it could be, like you mentioned with Dragon King, we don't definitively say that he died, but he did look pretty shattered. But I think I question it because when he hit the ground, there was some shattering going on, and that was just his ice armor. So I was like, I think he's dead, though. I mean, we'll see. I thought he was an effective antagonist as well. I will say another thing that didn't quite click for me in this episode, and it's a holdover from the last episode. I don't know that the reveal about the ISA's goals, Project America's goals, track with what we know about, because, it's like, okay, we're going to stop global warming and do healthcare. And it's like, yeah, but one of you is literally an Axis scientist. Dragon King's literally an Axis scientist, and we established all Gambler cares about is money. So why do those guys care about this? Like, I don't know. So I think maybe if I were to have a critique of this season, I was going to say I would have liked to spend more time with the JSA to understand their wants and their needs and their dynamic. But I guess that also extends to the ISA. If you're going to do this kind of swerve with their goals, and that makes sense for Jordan, Icicle, why does Brainwave care? Why does Dr. Ito care? Like, why are these their goals?
I do think it's a thing where if you as an audience member want it to make sense to you, you can sort of write your own headcanon in a way and be like, oh, maybe Brainwave he's actually pretending to care about this, but he wants to take over the world for himself or whatever. But the show is not giving you any of that.
Yeah.
And it is, I think I actually agree with you that it's like, looking back, I sort of wanted to spend more time with the JSA, but I wouldn't have mind spending more time with the Injustice Society too. I actually think the one thread this season really could have lost was the Shining Knight Justin stuff, and save that for season 2. Like, I think that has so much potential. It's a cool thing to add to the show, but I'm not sure it ever went anywhere this season and ended up taking up screen time that I think could have been used for character building for sort of our core characters.
I do agree with that, especially in light of the fact that he was the only one that didn't have a costume in the final fight, and it would have been cool if he had his costume. I did like the tease.
Maybe his janitor outfit is his new. He'll just take on that persona of the Shining Janitor Knight.
But I want to see the Knight costume. I did like the tease of I guess I'm going to have to find the other seven soldiers of victory. I'm like, yes, please do that. Please do that. That would be great. I would love to see a live action vigilante anytime. That's crazy to me. So we do get, beyond that, we do get some major teases. I will say, talking about headcanon and stuff like that, when we cut to, was it the magician or the wizard? He was off so quickly in the show. I can't remember his evil name.
The magician, I think.
Okay, yeah. You'll yell at us everybody will yell at us in the comments.
Someone will correct.
when I saw that even his coffin was there, that tripped me out. But anyway, maybe it was a coffin from his act. Whatever. You see, like
it is also the wizard. I just double checked. So
good.
Thank you to everyone who already typed that into the comments.
So you see all the magic stuff, and then you see it's Cindy, but you can't see her face at first. I'm like, wait, are we introducing Zatanna? That'd be nuts. But it is Cindy. I tricked myself, and she pulls out a purple gem. And even says that she can see Eclipso in there. And for people that may not know, Eclipso was created by Bob Haney, who also co-created the Teen Titans and Metamorpho, and Lee Elias, and first appeared in House of Secrets number 61 in 1963. And originally, he was a pretty just generic, and those days in the Silver Age, you just had to throw a new bad guy at the Justice League every couple issues. So he's just one of those. In, I think it was the 90s, he got revamped to basically be a malevolent entity that was the Wrath of God before the Spectre became the Wrath of God. And the diamond, which is called the Heart of Darkness, and is found in Africa, which I think in hindsight might be a little problematic, but we're just going to roll with it. It possesses people with this evil entity known as Eclipso, which appears to be the version of the character we're going with in this show. And you might also know that character. He wasn't referred to by the name of Eclipso, but he did show up in the Justice League animated series episode, Eclipsed. We also get a preview of another villain who we've teased throughout the show, Shade, a.k.a. Richard Swift, who was created by Gardner Fox and Hal Sharp, and Gardner Fox also created Jay Garrick's Flash, Hawkman, Zatanna, the Justice Society of America, the concept of the DC having a multiverse. He's a big deal. And he also, the Shade character also appears, that version of the Shade character also appears in a Justice League cartoon as part of the Injustice Gang. A version of him showed up in CW's Flash, and he also shows up in Young Justice Outsiders. And his character is actually really interesting because he, again, also started off as a pretty generic bad dude. But then in James Robinson's Starman run, he kind of became a mentor to the Jack Knight Starman. So I'm kind of hoping that we get a little bit of that complexity in this show because we didn't in the CW Flash. But Caroline,
and I think within just Stargirl itself, we've heard the Shade mentioned as someone that betrayed Jordan. Like it's kind of vague, but we get the sense that there's he might not fully agree with the ISA's methods.
Absolutely. So with those, obviously there's another big reveal after that. But as far as these like teases for future antagonists, what did you think of those?
Yeah, I think that they're fun. Like it's kind of what I've come to expect from shows like this. I think I'm not a person that knows this comic book lore super well, so I don't have that like personal connection to who these people are, but they're very effective. And like, I'm very excited that it looks like Cindy will be getting a bigger role next season because she, I think, is probably my biggest standout of the season. Well, no, Luke Wilson is my biggest standout of the season, but Cindy is probably of the villains, like definitely a huge standout for me. So the idea of getting more from her is super exciting.
Absolutely. And it's also worth mentioning, and I did not know this, but because Eclipso can possess people, one of the iterations of Eclipso is actually Alex Montez, who in the comics is Yolanda / Wildcat's cousin, but we've already introduced Alex in the show as her brother. So I would be surprised if they, considering how much they exploit the comic material on the show, I'd be surprised if they don't do something with that. So if we get to the final reveal, which is the fact that, I mean, we do get a little Christmas scene.
I was going to say, the big reveal is what that present finally was.
It was an
world's
adorable
greatest
present.
Dad mug. Very adorable.
Wait, so what did you think about Courtney and Pat finally, like, or I guess it's Courtney just accepting Pat as her father figure?
Yeah. Mainly, I just really wanted to go to Christmas at Pat and Barbara's house because that looked like the nicest Christmas party I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was just so sweet and warm. But yeah, really sweet. Like, I think Pat and Courtney's relationship has been so central to the season, and I think it's really well done in this episode. Like a nice little emotional climax for both of them. I also noticed on my second viewing that when Barbara walks into the room, she's actually holding a mug that says "World's Best Mom." That seems like Courtney made it at the same time. Great. So that was a really sweet little Easter egg.
Courtney's killing it on the birthday presents. Mike gets nothing. He gets no present. Mike. Yeah, poor Mike. I'm sure we'll do cool stuff with Mike next season. No, I thought that was cool too, especially since, like you, it's with Luke Wilson, and I've said this before, it's one of those reminders of like, oh, you're a movie star. Just because of how warm and affectionate and adorable Pat is, and just it's cool to see that relationship grow, and it'll be cool to see that dynamic grow in a season 2, which we are getting on CW. And what might throw a spanner in the works, or might not, because she seemed to pretty much come to terms with it, is Sylvester Pemberton inexplicably shows up, played by Joel McHale, at the end of the episode, and he seems to be alive and well.
Yeah, and seems to have his memory. Like, this doesn't seem to be an amnesia situation.
Yeah.
At least he knows his name and he knows Pat's name. So, yeah, a completely unexpected endpoint for this episode for me. I must just have really good, like, Joel McHale face recognition from my years of watching Community, because as soon as there was an overhead shot, I was like, oh, it's Joel McHale.
That's pretty impressive, because I've actually been currently rewatching Community, and when I saw that overhead shot, I'm like, oh, it must be her actual dad.
Her dad, Sam,
because they did a good job copying that cough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say.
What do you think that means to Courtney or the show or Pat or anything?
Who knows? Like, I think that this is, with the villain teases, it's very clear, like, these will be our villains for season 2. And I think that this Sylvester tease is just like, who knows? Will he become a main part of the show? Is he just going to be around for an episode or two to pass the baton more officially? But I have to imagine that this is going to lead to some conflict over, like, who the cosmic staff really belongs to, and will he want to take up the Starman mantle with it again? But yeah, I more than anything, I was like, okay, what's Joel McHale's, like, filming schedule? Does he have time to be a series regular? Is this just going to be another guest appearance? But yeah, like, credit to them for having a super unexpected endpoint.
Is he just going to show up for, like, the first episode and then we deal with it? I like the suggestion you made about the conflict about who gets to wield the staff. I will admit, when I saw it, I was a little like, I kind of don't care about this, because I thought we resolved, like, for me, I think it comes back to me, the subplot of her thinking Starman was her dad was my least favorite part of the show, because it made she's talking to people that would know pretty definitively whether he was or not, and so, like, revisiting that, I'm like, oh, I don't care, and I guess the comic nerd in me was like, I'd rather see somebody like Jack Knight, who is a version of Starman or whatever. But when you talk about the idea of, like, who owns the staff and there being some conflict there, I think that could be really interesting. You do have the problem of, like, how is he alive?
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean,
stabbed pretty bad. Did they bury him?
Stabbed bad, presumably. I mean, Pat was right there. It's not like this was a situation where, we never found the body. Like, it feels pretty definitive that he died. So, I mean, or is this, a Dr. Ito thing, and this is a bad, like, secretly a bad version, or really endless possibilities. I wouldn't be surprised if the writers don't even fully know at this point, like, if they're kind of going to gauge, how this season went, and maybe see where it takes them for a season 2.
So as we wrap up, what are your overall thoughts on this season as a whole, and how this episode fits into it?
Yeah, I am really positive on this season. Like, I think I went into this show, even though it is a DC Universe show, I think because it was simultaneously streaming on the CW, I really did think of this as, like, okay, this is going to be another one of those Arrowverse shows. Like, I like those shows a lot. I review Supergirl. I love Supergirl, but there is a limit to, I think, what they're aiming for in a way. And so I sort of had low expectations for Stargirl, and especially around the middle of the season, like, really impressed me with its willingness to subvert things. And I think, like you mentioned earlier, like, it's sort of violence and its willingness to dig into the darkness of this stuff. I think all the performances are really great. I think I look forward to seeing more from the JSA, because in a way I think that the non-Courtney members of the JSA are sort of the least developed characters. But I think all those actors are strong, and there's good potential for them. And just, again, Luke Wilson, like, I think he is the thing that just, like, elevates the show for me from being, like, a good superhero show to at least a show that has the potential to be a great superhero show.
Agreed.
Again, I don't know if the finale, if it was 100% what I personally wanted from it, but I can appreciate its sort of cinematic ambitions and how it wrapped things up. So even if the finale was not my favorite episode of the season, I still think I'm overall feeling very positive on the season. You know what?
I agree with that. I gotta, going into the show, I just was being honest with myself. It's like, I'm not really the target demographic for the show, like, which I overall think is a positive, because a lot of people get into the superhero media when they're children, when they're younger, when they're in high school. And so something that ostensibly was specifically set to target young girls and young women, great, more of that, please. More shows that target younger audiences and get them into this medium that I really enjoy. But like you, as it went on, it's like they're doing a really good job with this material, and I'm genuinely interested in seeing what they do for season 2. I'm looking forward to more JSA characters popping up. Like we still haven't resolved the Pen, and we still haven't resolved the Green Lantern's lantern.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see where we go with all of that, and I think the teases for the future are really interesting. So props to Jeff Johns and his whole creative team. And I will admit, like when they did the little dedication to Jeff Johns' sister who inspired the character, is like that got me a little bit. That was I thought that was very understandable.
It was really lovely.
Yeah, it was lovely and it was sweet. So props to you, Stargirl. Caroline, where, as we wrap up, where can everybody find you? And what are you working on?
Yeah, so my writing's on the AV Club and sometimes elsewhere as well. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Caroline Siede. Like I said, just finished reviewing The Umbrella Academy as well as Stargirl. So if that's a show that, like me, you were excited to binge, then you can read along as I parse that season as well.
Awesome. Thank you again for joining us. And thank you all, everybody at home, for watching these Stargirl reviews. We're going to be doing new reviews and new videos soon. So be sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me at DJ Talks Trash. You can follow the show and our podcast at Only Stupid Answers on Twitter. Yank out the fouls from Stupid. And we're doing, I'm doing interviews and other shows on our Patreon at patreon.com/Only Stupid Answers. I'll see you guys soon.